name is Robin Selvig, and I am so honored to be here today with so many distinguished people with my little anecdotal story that I learned about 5 or 6 years ago from my mother's older sister. So my family also came, as John did, from Litovski's Fatki Mikulash, and the house that you see in the background is actually the house that my mother was born in. And then that's the church. My grandfather was a Baptist minister at that particular church. This is my mother. Her name was Jenny, was her English name, after her father was Jan. Her mother called her Draha, and her Slovak last name was Piro. So she was actually issued an immigration card in 1939, November of 1939, to come to the United States. And this is just a little bit of information about her. She was born in 1930. This shows that they left on September 19th, 1939, to travel to the United States. The next slide is, as I mentioned before, the Slovak Baptist Church that my grandfather was the minister of. It was on a major street in Mikulash. Maya 73 was the address. And the thing that I remember, my brother and I took my mom back there in 1980, and that was her first time back since leaving in 1939. And we were driving through Mikulash, and none of the street names matched up at that time in 1980 with what we thought they were supposed to be or with what they had been when she was a child. But we're driving down this street, and all of a sudden she says, "That's it." And she recognized the church that her father had been the pastor at. And then we actually had the privilege of staying in the house where she was born with the people that were living there now. And her best friend lived next door, so we had quite an experience. So this is my family. This is my father, Jan Pirok. And then the picture is my mother and her sister. Again, my mother was born in 1930. Her sister was born in 1928, so was a couple of years older than her. And these are both taken out in front of the house. Just to give you some perspective, Litovski Mikulash is in the high Tatra Mountains, very, very, very close to the Polish border. My grandfather, who I mentioned, Jan Pirok, attended seminary in Chicago from 1925 to 1970, and then went back to the Slovak Republic. Initially, he was called to pastor a church in Canada, but that didn't all work out, and later was called to a church in Chicago in 1939. He was one of these people who pretty well had his ear to the ground, and so I believe that he kind of had an understanding of what might be going on in 1939 in Slovakia, and this was the best move for his family. So here it is, August of 1939. We all know that Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, and these German soldiers are marching down the street in front of my mother's house and in front of the church. And my 9-year-old mother is out there feeling very compassionate and being the pastor's daughter that she was, that she'd be kind and polite to everyone, and certainly not knowing what was going to ultimately happen. She's out there giving the soldiers glasses of water because they look tired. And they've been marching and marching and marching, and she thought that would be something that they needed. So that was her kind deed for the day. Some officers did spend the night in my grandparents' home that night, as they frequently did as they were marching through. And then on September 1st of 1939, Germany invaded Poland. my parents, or my grandparents, were already preparing to leave, and they ended up getting out of Czechoslovakia on a ship. They actually departed on October 15th, 1939, on the Vulcania. They went south into Bratislava and then into Hungary and departed from Trieste. So this is just a kind of a pictorial of the soldiers marching down the street on their way into Poland. And then this is the family. And I actually have my grandfather's passport, as I mentioned on this slide, that my grandfather's passport was issued only in his name, but he had tucked inside this family picture. And nowhere along the way was it ever questioned that it wasn't a passport for the whole family. So, I mean, they could have had trouble all day, all along the way, but the good Lord was looking out for them and taking care of them. So they successfully traveled. This is the ship that they traveled on, the Vulcania. They arrived in New York on November 4th of 1939, took the train and moved to Chicago initially. My grandfather had a Baptist church in the suburban Chicago area. Then he had one in Minneapolis. My mother and her sister went to high school in Minneapolis. And then he also was a pastor at a church in Windsor, Ontario. And he went back and lived in the Chicago area until 1977 when they moved to California where his older daughter lived. And then ultimately they came back to Minnesota and are actually buried at the Czech National Cemetery in New Prague. So again, a little bit of an anecdotal story, but very interesting to me and momentous. And I so appreciate being part of this fantastic team of people that have been speaking today.